Good evening, everyone. Good to see myself and hopefully you as you're watching us this evening for our midweek Bible study. It's a Bible study, even though we're looking at a couple of non-theological topics tonight as we go through the study. It's just me here in the office. Brother Butch is away, but he will be joining me here in just a minute. I'll have him join me here in a second as we get through these topics tonight. Let me just run over our announcements again. Let's not forget about Sunday. We will have our Sunday schools meeting like we did this past week. I was pleased with the number we had come to Sunday school, and I know we had a number of people out of town for the Labor Day holiday. So I want to encourage everyone to join us this week. We have everything distanced. We're doing our part. We have our mask here. And when you come in, we're going to check your temperature. And look at here. We even have the very rare Lysol spray around here. So we have all the bases covered so that you can stay healthy if you come and worship with us. So I want to just encourage you to do that. Just take all the precautions. But hey, if you're comfortable with it, we would love to have you come and do Sunday school with us and then we'll get into our worship service this week. Continue to pray for one another, especially those that are away from home right now, either in the hospital or in various places like that we can't get to right now. I want to ask you to continue to lift each other up in that sense. I did not find out, my fault. I should have had the news on today to find out what the governor said about moving to phase 3, but it doesn't matter. We're going to continue to do what the Lord has laid on our heart, and that's where we're at right now. So I want to encourage you to do that this coming Sunday. We're looking forward to seeing you there. All right. I'm trying to think if there are any other pressing announcements that I need to make. I'm drawing a blank, so I'm guessing that must be it. I'm sure I'll think of something as we're going through the study tonight. But let me go ahead and pray, and then I'm gonna invite Brother Butch to join me here online, and we'll get through a couple topics tonight. So, Father, I want to thank you again tonight for the opportunity to study your word and look at these important things tonight, Lord. These important articles, Lord, things that are important enough, Lord, that we as Baptists needed to take a stance on them and write a doctrinal statement about it, Lord. I pray, Father, that you'll help us to have clear vision, clear hearts and minds as we study this tonight, Lord. Help us to firmly understand what it is that we're discussing tonight, Lord, because this does identify us, Lord, as Baptists. And I just thank you for the opportunity to study this tonight, Lord. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, let me see if I can get Butch to join me here. Tonight we're going to be looking at, there he is. We're going to be looking at corporation, and then we're going to be looking at social order. So we're going to do things a little different tonight. Brother Butch is going to do one of them, and then I'll do the other one. So I'm going to hand it over to him first. So go ahead, Butch.
All right. So tonight we're going to talk about, we're going to start tonight talking about a topic that is something that's pretty well known about Southern Baptists, and that is cooperation. That doesn't mean that all Southern Baptists are cooperative. It just means that is part of our legacy as Southern Baptists, that we as a church are willing to cooperate with other churches to some extent. We'll talk about that here real briefly. So Article 14 of the Baptist Faith and Message reads this way: cooperation. Christ's people should, as occasion requires, organize such associations and convention as may best secure cooperation for the great objects of the kingdom of God. Such organizations have no authority over one another or over the churches. They are voluntary and advisory bodies designed to elicit, combine, and direct the energies of our people in the most effective manner. Members of New Testament churches should cooperate with one another in carrying forward the missionary, educational, and benevolent ministries for the extension of Christ's kingdom. Christian unity in the New Testament sense is spiritual harmony and voluntary cooperation for common ends by various groups of Christ's people. Cooperation is desirable between the various Christian denominations when the end to be attained is itself justified and when such cooperation involves no violation of conscience or compromise of loyalty to Christ and his word as revealed in the New Testament. That's a lot of words to describe what should be a relatively simple topic, but as we begin to sort of dig in here, we'll find out that it's really topic. There's a lot of detail here that we could get into, but we're going to kind of talk about this in a in a way that is sort of a do's and don'ts sort of approach. So as we go through here, we'll talk about that in this way. So one thing that we have talked about pretty extensively as we've gone through this Baptist Faith and Message is the mission of the church. And as you recall, the number one primary mission, really the only real true mission of the church, is to share the gospel to the ends of the earth. That ultimately is the mission of the church. Now, we as a church have some other responsibilities, but the mission of the church is to share the gospel to the ends of the earth. Now, obviously, within our little church, it would be impossible for us to reach every person on the planet with the message of hope that's found in Christ. It would be literally impossible for our little church to visit every corner of the earth and share the gospel. So now that I know that's kind of a ridiculous statement to make, but in order to sort of frame what we're about to talk about as we cover this article, this will help us to sort of put into context what cooperation is all about. So let me read just a couple of verses to you again. We've read these all recently, and I just want to kind of share them with you one more time, just to kind of set up the idea about what our mission as a church is. The first one comes from Acts chapter 1, verses 7 and 8, and it says, Jesus, said to them, "It is not for you to know the times or epochs which the Father has fixed by his own authority, but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witnesses both in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria, even to the remotest part of the earth." Now, you've probably heard this broken down 100 different times, but this basically means everywhere from your local community all the way out to the end of the world. That's what Jesus was talking about. Matthew 28, verses 18 through 20, Jesus said, Jesus came up and spoke to them, saying, "All authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all what I have commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age." Now that is the mission of the church, is to share the gospel. It's very clear what we are called to do. Jesus left no doubt in our minds what it is that he wanted us as a church to do, and that is to share the gospel. Very, very clear. And we've talked about this at such length here recently. I'm not going to belabor that point, but I do think it's important that we state that at the outset of our understanding of what cooperation is all about, because the reality is that as I read this article, this is a little bit less about defining what the mission is and more about giving us a mechanism that will allow us to fulfill this calling of Christ upon our lives individually and corporately as a church. Cooperation is essentially a means that we as the body of Christ are able to work together to accomplish the mission that he has called us to. Now, we talked about, I believe it was last week, about, or maybe a couple weeks ago, about the idea that we individually have a responsibility to share our faith with those around us. And we've talked, and Brother Jeff has done this in a couple of different recent sermons too, has kind of reiterated and restated this reality, and our Sunday school lessons have revolved around that. So friends, if you haven't gotten to the understanding yet, it is your responsibility to share your faith. It is your responsibility to let other people know that you know a Savior that can make a difference in their lives, and He is loving, and He loves them, and He loves you, and that's our responsibility to share that truth with people. Now, this idea of cooperation that we're going to talk about is not something that's new to our modern church. In other words, this is not something that Southern Baptists just in the 60s or even in the 20s came up with and said, you know what, let's form a cooperative program, and that's what we're going to do. That this is not anything new. This idea. Matter of fact, if you go back to 2 Corinthians chapter 8 and chapter 9 as well, you'll find some details about what Paul was talking to the churches about. And actually, chapter 8, he begins by commending the churches in Macedonia for their giving. I'll read some of that for you. And I'm going to read it out of the I'm going to do something I don't normally do. I very rarely will you hear me read out of anything other than NIV or the NASB, just because those are my two favorite versions. But I like the way this is written in the ERV. So the easy to read version says this in 2 Corinthians chapter 8. Says, and now, brothers and sisters, we want to tell you what God's grace has done in the churches in Macedonia. These believers have been tested by great troubles, and they are very poor, but their great joy caused them to be very generous in their giving. I can tell you that they gave as much as they were able, and even more than they can afford. Brother Jeff, there's something that you can preach on that one sentence right there. No one told them to do this. It was their idea, but they asked us again and again. They begged us to let them share in this service for God's people, and they gave in a way that we did not expect. They gave themselves to the Lord and to us before they gave their money. And this last phrase is the most important one. This is what God wants. How about being a cheerful giver, huh? So listen, this idea of cooperation is not something that's new. There are many, many, many instances that we can read in the New Testament about the New Testament church and how not only were they impacting their local communities for Christ, but they were, more importantly, they were willing to change in such a way so that they could send resources to other churches so that those other churches could also impact their local communities. And in some cases, they were sending resources to these other churches so that they could feed some of their people. And there are lots of different reasons and mechanisms that are places where this money was being used. But they were as a church, they had a view of everybody who is a Christian needs my support, and what I have is given to me so that I can be a good steward, like we talked about last week, and share those resources in order to further the gospel. That's the purpose. And what cooperation basically does is it allows us to not just give to our local church, which is very important. As a matter of fact, this is ultimately what we're called to do. We are called to feed the priests in our church. We are called to give to our local church specifically. But as a church, we give to larger programs so that it allows things. And in this case, this case of the New Testament church, these churches were giving so that Paul could continue to share the gospel in many other places. Paul's conclusion, this is what God wants, is important for us to understand. He wants us to be willing as a local church body and as members of the body of Christ to be willing to give those resources so that end can be met. It's important that we find a way to participate in the global spread of the gospel as well. Now, it's important that we share locally, but we're called as a church to share the gospel globally. Now, so how is it that we can accomplish that mission if we already said that as a local church it would be impossible for us to take what we have here in Delhi and reach out to all parts of the earth? If that's the case, then how can we do that? And what the Baptist Faith and Message talks about is the formation of different sorts of groupings of churches in order to accomplish this task. These range from some local associations and state conventions, and even some national or international conventions as well. Brother Jeff, you had mentioned that there's a couple of these that we're a part of. Can you throw some of those out there so that we can?
Yeah, let me go ahead and throw some of those out there, especially for those that might be relatively new to our church, so to speak. So let me go ahead and throw that in there. We here at First Baptist Delhi are a part of a local association. It's called the Richland Baptist Association. Within our association, it's not a large association by any means. There are 26 churches in our association. We're run our leader or director is director of missions is Brother Johnny Smith. Their office is, we rent out the East Rayville Baptist Church. That's where their office is. But we're a part of that association. Now, if you're saying, well, what does this do for us? Now, we do actually budget to give to the association. What that does, it covers the cost of renting the facilities. It takes care of our DOM's expenses. Miss Ann she's the secretary for the local association. But what does this do for us as a church? Well, it does a lot for me as a pastor. My director of missions is like my pastor. I speak with Brother Johnny quite often, especially if there is something that runs through the church that I'm like, okay, I think I know this is how this should be handled. Maybe I better get a little input or a little, I need a sounding board here. So I'll call up my director of missions. I fellowship with other pastors about this. This is when the pandemic hit. We had a series of meetings to try to figure out how are we going to do this, because nobody really knew. There's a lot of cooperation there. We also annually have in the past, we won't this year, we have a large Christmas musical and everything. We've had either in Rayville or Start. That's part of the association. There are various things like that that the local association works with us on. In fact, those others that go on the mission trips with us here are from other churches within the association. So you can see how you can take our group and then you pull people from other churches apart, because we're all like-minded. We pull our resources together, and then that makes us more effective than that. Now, not only are we part of the Richland Baptist Association, we're part of the Louisiana Baptist Convention. The office being in Alexandria, this is the state level. We do give to this one as well. This pays the salaries of those. It maintains the office there. What do they do for us? Well, their main thing is for training and such for us. Again, just this week, I've already talked with some of the members down there at the state convention. They're going to be sending some people in to help us grow our Sunday school. This is what they do. This is where us partnering with them is so very important. So we're part of the Louisiana Baptist Convention. And then as a result of that, we're part of the Southern Baptist Convention. This is the big one here that's made up of all the Southern Baptist churches in the United States. That one's centered in Nashville, Tennessee, is where this one's at. So these are the I guess you would call them the local cooperative organizations that we're a part of, the local association, the state convention, and then the national convention, for those of you that were not aware of that. So,
all right, very good. So what these larger bodies tend to do is they take, we take some small portion of our undesignated funds and we pull them together with other churches so that we can accomplish some bigger missions. And some of those bigger missions include, as Brother Jeff kind of pointed out, some of those among those things. We talked about education a week or two ago. One of the things that these larger organizations are able to do by pooling our money into some of these programs, some of these different associations, allows them to establish educational facilities as well, colleges, Christian colleges, and specifically Southern Baptist colleges, seminaries, and that sort of thing. And so it's important for us to understand that we as a local church could never pull off creation of a college. We just couldn't do that. But
we can do very little as a local church. For instance, here's a great example. This next Sunday, we will be starting our drive for our state missions offering. This is to plant churches within the state of Louisiana. The goal this year is $1.7 million. Sorry, but LPC how we don't have that kind of money.
Right.
Okay. So you will hear me this next week. We will begin to kick off our state missions offering. The money that we give will be pooled with others so that they can go ahead and plant churches throughout. Now, this is in addition to, you've heard of the cooperative program that Brother Butch is talking about that funds those seminaries and all the training and everything. We give a certain portion every year to that as well. And I will say this, one of the things I'm happy about is since I've been here, we have decided and agreed that every year we will increase by increments our giving to the cooperative program. How high will we go? Well, I'm going to let the Lord tell us that. But every year we have been able to do that, which is what we're supposed to do.
Right, absolutely. And that cooperative program, just to kind of throw this out there, as I was doing some study for this particular lesson, one of the things that I found was that it was in 1925 that the cooperative program was established, because what happened prior to that was all of these different organizations, several of them like the colleges and those sorts of things, that what some of these different organizations that the cooperative program now has support for, or now supports, they were sending their agents and representatives into the churches to tell people, hey, we need money for this, we need money for that. And it was just, it was pretty ineffective for one thing. But it also was kind of a jumble of, there were additional overheads that were part of some of that collection effort. And so the cooperative program not only made it possible for all of these to fall under one umbrella, but it also sort of reduced and helped to better manage the money that's given to the church. And so as a church, as a large organization, the Southern Baptist Convention now is also being a better steward of those resources that God gives us. So this is one of the reasons why it's important for us to pay attention to and to give to those sorts of things. So I just thought I would throw that out there. I thought it was an interesting take. As I was studying, I read that. I thought I might throw that. I don't think it ever made it into my notes, but it's pretty typical that we'll find most Southern Baptist churches will be part of some of these different alliances, and but it's not true that we have to do this. This is a choice that we have as a church, but there's a couple of dangerous things that we have to kind of pay attention to as we join these associations. Now we as a church are part of associations and alliances in particular that are pretty specifically Southern Baptist in nature. And so we have a really good idea about what the doctrinal positions of these churches that we're connecting to. We have a really good idea about what their theological positions are. And if you don't remember back from way back at the very first time we talked about started this series of lessons, the difference between doctrine and theology, maybe you can go back and look, or maybe I can just tell you real briefly. Theology is the study of the nature of God. And it's very important as we talk about different things. It is possible that you and I may have a disagreement on a doctrinal position. That is the idea that the doctrine really revolves around how do I interpret scriptures? And there are certain scriptures that we can interpret perhaps in different ways. An example of that is how do I view, eschatologically speaking, that's to throw out my nickel word tonight, how do I view what's going to happen at the end times versus how do you view what's going to happen? Those are more doctrinal positions. Whereas was Jesus God? Is the Godhead a Trinity? Those are theological questions. Now, the biggest difference in these two has to do with the idea that I can have a different doctrinal position than you do, and you can have a different doctrinal position than I do, and we still can understand that you and I can continue this discussion all the way into heaven. But if you and I have a different theological position, then one of us is wrong about who God is, and we may not see each other in heaven. That's the weight of theology versus doctrine. Is a really, really important difference in here that we need to sort of establish here.
Also, let me go ahead. And I was going to save this for the end, but this is a good place for me to put this. So, some of the other things that might prevent, let me just go ahead and throw this in there, prevent us from being a part of some group here, as we're talking about this corporation type thing, is, to me, it's the end of what we're looking to accomplish, the mission here, so to speak. Okay, I think that's also important for a church to know, okay, we've set a goal. This is what we're looking to get to. Okay, can we work to this one to get there, or can we not? Case in point, when I was overseas, I'm with the International Mission Board, which is part of the Southern Baptist Convention, which is funded by your Lottie Moon Christmas offering, which is given through your corporate program. So yes, those 10 years I was overseas, you guys were paying my salary. Thank you very much for that. I'll just let you know that. But as the team leader, our goal was to share the gospel and plant churches. Okay. Now, we had some other people that come along because we were a solid group. We had a solid team, focused. And I'm not tooting my own horn here, but we had clear definitions of what we wanted to do and how we wanted to get there. Now, you would have some others that would come along that were not Baptist. They were a part of another denomination, which wasn't the problem. And I could sit down with their leadership and we could look at the Word of God and say, yes, we agree on this and we agree on this and we agree on this. You know, we really didn't see a whole lot of stuff up front that would prevent us from fellowshipping together, like we were talking about. You know, we could have a meal together. We could do a Bible study together. We could have prayer meetings together. All that was fine. But when it really got down to looking at the end result, we found big differences there, and it made it difficult to continue. For instance, our goal was to share Christ, to see people come to Christ, and to plant churches. I feel it is important, and you can agree with me or not. I feel it's important that once we have decided to follow Jesus Christ, we need to get plugged into a church. Why? The reason being is because no single person outside of Jesus Christ possesses every spiritual gift. You just don't. Okay? That's why we have that analogy of the body. You just don't have a complete body with all the members together. And I would encourage people to join a local body, or in the case where we were, where it was underground, we could pinpoint other people that were meeting and we could plug them into these other groups here, these house churches or whatever. Whereas I come to find out this other group that wanted to work with us, they wanted to kind of pull their efforts and work with us. They were teaching, they took priesthood of the believer too far and were actually teaching or discouraging people from meeting together. They said you don't have to be together to be a church. One person could be the church. And I disagreed with that. And it made it difficult for us to continue to work together. In fact, because of some projects we were doing versus what they were doing, we had to part ways. Now, I still call them a brother in Christ. Do I think I'll see that family in heaven? Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. I'm just saying what they were working towards and what we were working towards were two different things, and they were not going to work together. When we're trying to pull people together, they're trying to separate people. So therefore, it made that corporation difficult. So yes, we theology is important and doctrine is important, but I think the ends or the mission or the goal is extremely important too when it comes to working with other people. So
absolutely, yeah, and so and there are some topics that are like that end mission, and there and points of theology and those sorts of things that make certain associations absolute non-starters. We can be friends. We can, we can sit down and have dinner together, but we can't be partners in the accomplishment of the mission that the church is called to, because, those sorts of things, we have a different view of who God is, if you will. It's possible that they can have different doctrinal positions, but we can maybe do some things that we partner with. But as Brother Jeff said, we have to be very careful that the aim for what we're doing is going to be the same, and we're going to end up where God tells us we are supposed to be going, because ultimately the reality is that we are not independent from the larger church anyway. I mean, we are, as a local body of believers, we are a part of the larger church that is the body of Christ. We all have a calling on our lives individually by Christ, and not just individually, but as a group of believers in this local community, we have a calling as well. Now, ultimately, our mission is the same, but the part that we play in that mission may be a little different than other churches, and the role that they are called to play may be slightly different. And I'll give you an example of this. If you go into certain parts of the country, you'll find that there are certain neighborhoods that are one ethnicity is very strong in that neighborhood, and you or I may not be welcome in that particular area. There are other areas that have a different ethnicity, or maybe some other grouping, and my mission, for example, probably would never be to enter into or to, and I don't want to, this is not a challenge to God, but the reality is that my mission probably will never be to stand up and preach in a Hispanic area, because I don't speak Spanish and I don't speak their language, and I don't, and so your mission, if you are a Spanish speaker, or if you are sort of familiar with the culture, your mission may be to do that. Your gifting is slightly different than mine, or perhaps it's not even so much about gifting, it's about your background is different. So your calling and my calling aren't the same, although our mission is the same. And we have to bear that in mind, that we have different groupings for a reason. We are called into this church for a purpose. What is that purpose? That is to assist Christ's church, it's not ours, his church, to fulfill the mission of lifting him up so that men can be called to him. That's the purpose of our church. It is his, and I mean that in both organizationally, that is First Baptist Church Delhi does not belong to us as members of First Baptist Church. It doesn't belong to the Southern Baptist Convention. It belongs to Christ. And I also mean that in the sense that we, as the body of Christ, are his as well. And we need to individually and corporately pay attention to this. And Paul taught that we are all gifted differently as well. The Holy Spirit gives you and I perhaps different spiritual gifts that we are to use in order to help us individually fulfill this mission and calling of Christ. So it's important for us to bear these things in mind as we look for how do we accomplish this mission of sharing the gospel with the whole world. These organizations, associations, conventions, and whatever other sort of groupings to help us to fulfill that. But ultimately, there is one other mission of the church, or one other purpose of the church, and I want to share that just real briefly before I finish up this cooperation idea. One other purpose of the church is to edify the body. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with that term, edify, essentially what that means is to lift up. You and I may have a hard week. Sometimes we may go through periods of times in our lives where we struggle with different things. I heard a story of recently of yet another young person who took their own life, and the difficulty in hearing that story is knowing that there is a God out there who loves that kid deeply and personally, and who went out of his way to provide hope for that person. And when we lose hope, it is very easy for us to to lose track of what can I do next. And it is the purpose of the church, among other things, is to edify. That is to lift up those men and women who are part of the church. We are to lift each other up. And I think it's very important that and Brother Jeff has says repeatedly, time and time again, we need to be praying for each other. But we need to do, in addition to praying for each other, as Brother Jeff also says, pick up the phone and call somebody and just talk to them. So anyway, that was just something recently that was shared with me, and it just I thought I needed to share that.
Yeah, and let me encourage you to do this. What you just shared, the story about someone who took their life. Here's where the corporation is beneficial to us, because here at First Baptist Church Delhi, we don't necessarily have someone who is educated or skilled in working with someone like that. Does that mean that if someone comes into our church and says, "Look, I'm in a bad place," yeah, I mean, I've had counseling courses and all that kind of stuff. I can do that. But what I'm saying is that's not something I'm gifted in or especially about. But because we're a part of a larger association, and because we have like-minded churches in the area, they may have someone in there. And this is where the corporation can help out. If you come in and tell me I'm struggling with this or I'm struggling with that, if it's something that we can't help with here, it's a matter of picking up the phone, and I can make a phone call, and I can find someone that I have confidence in, because they are like-minded in theology and doctrine, just like we are. This is where the beauty of that corporation, that association, and all comes together. We can help each other out in these things, and it makes us much more effective in what we're called to do, even in lifting each other up like this.
Absolutely.
I know Butch mentioned this, but I want to reiterate this. Our connection to associations or conventions and everything is strictly voluntary. We are not required to do this at all. And I mean, if for whatever reason, the Southern Baptist Convention decided to take a stance that was completely unbiblical, and whatever it was, and they started trying to filter that down, we have a right as a local body to say, nope, that is not what we believe. That is wrong. And we can break away from that. We are not bound to them in any way. We are strictly voluntary. But as long as they're tracking in the right direction, we're tracking in the right direction. It makes us much more effective. It makes us stronger. It multiplies our monies and everything to reach the world. So you wonder how in the world that you as a person can fulfill the Great Commission. Well, one way is through the associations and the corporations, and you giving and everything. It makes you much more effective and gives you a means to the ends that we're all supposed to be doing, and that's carrying on the Great Commission. So
don't use that as an excuse not to share your faith personally, though.
No, I'm not saying that. We're supposed to do that. Hopefully you've been getting that message. Like Butch says, I kind of have been hitting that hard here lately. But anyway, yeah, do you have anything else on this one, Butch?
I think we're good. I think we got it covered.
All right, I think so. I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of background about the association we're a part of. We have a wonderful association that we're a part of, and wonderful other pastors and churches in the area. So anyway, all right, I'm going to attempt in the remaining time that we have to cover a very touchy topic in social order. And I don't know if we can get through this one or not. Let me read to you Article 15 on the Christian and social order. It says this: all Christians are under obligation to seek to make the will of Christ supreme in our own lives and in human society. Means and methods used for the improvement of society and the establishment of righteousness among men can be truly and permanently helpful only when they are rooted in the regeneration of the individual by the saving grace of God in Jesus Christ. In the spirit of Christ, Christians should oppose racism, every form of greed, selfishness, and vice, and all forms of sexual immorality, including adultery, homosexuality, and pornography. We should work to provide for the orphan, the needy, the abused, the aged, the helpless, and the sick. We should speak on behalf of the unborn and contend for the sanctity of all human life from conception to natural death. Every Christian should seek to bring industry, government, and society as a whole under the sway of the principles of righteousness, truth, and brotherly love. In order to promote these ends, Christians should be ready to work with all men of goodwill in any good cause, always being careful to act in the spirit of love without compromising their loyalty to Christ and his truth. Okay, social order is, like I said, a very touchy subject, especially in today's culture. It seems like every one of those hot topics I just read is exactly that today, a hot topic. And we are not going to debate these tonight. I'm going to tell you what we as Baptists, the stance we're going to take on this, and we're going to move on, okay? If we wanted to have a discussion in greater detail about some of these social topics, that would need to be done in a known setting, a closed setting, whereas we could be free to share and nothing could be taken out of context. Now, let me tell you the opposite of what is here, because some Christians take a stance on social order, and their idea about the problems in culture is they want to remove themselves from it or withdraw from society as a whole. The first monks, for instance, emerged in the desert out of Egypt, and their desire was, or their stance was, that social or society and culture in the world is evil, so there's no way I really can do anything about it, so I'm just going to pull myself away from it and live a monastic lifestyle. That was their take on this. That later bled into monasteries and convents and stuff, where multiple people would take this idea, remove themselves from society, so as not to have to deal with it, so to speak. Let me just say this: that's number one, it's unbiblical. Number two, it's very dangerous to do that, because the idea behind that is often misguided and misunderstood. And people can get the wrong opinion of someone who has decided to just completely remove themselves like that. Okay. Now, there are some who we easily identify as Christian who have not necessarily removed themselves altogether from that, but have decided to remove themselves from the public spotlight and decided to commune together. For instance, the Amish and the Mennonites, both of which are descendants from Anabaptists. Yeah, they actually have similar beliefs as we do as Southern Baptists, but their stance is, we do not want to be, I don't know. Well, I don't know what's a good word here to use. They think by being out there in society like that maybe it could
stain them.
Stain them. Thank you. I was trying to say rub them, but that wasn't the word I was trying to say. Stain them. So therefore, they pull away from that. They will not serve in public office. They won't serve in the public spotlight whatsoever, and they live in these communities separate from everybody. And I'm not saying that. I'm not knocking anyone doing it. I'm just saying this is the stance that they're taking on this, okay? There is a group that in the past has taken this social stance too far, and have actually, uh, I don't know if that's a good way to put it. I don't really want to go down this pathway, but they have actually replaced regeneration with doing good works. And that's actually, we're talking about those who are evangelical in belief, so to speak. Now, there's good stuff that comes out of this because you get into your denominational hospitals and clinics and stuff as a result of that. But they put more emphasis on the good works and less emphasis on regeneration. So I think, in my opinion, that's going just a tad bit too far. Okay. So those are some of the various views, extremes, I should say, of dealing with social order. Now, what do we as Southern Baptists, what does Article 15 say about us as Southern Baptists and how we relate to social order? Okay. We are supposed to impact all of society with the gospel of Christ, first of all. Okay. This goes right back to the Great Commission. It goes right back to what we're left here to do, and that is to tell the world about Jesus Christ. There are people who are lost and hurting, in desperate need of hope. We'll just use this word again here. So we are supposed to be the ones to tell them this. And that even includes the fact that we have to deal with some difficult topics sometimes. We have to come face to face with people we may not necessarily agree with in society in an effort to share Christ with them. Okay. One of the things we have to remember, though, is that all humans are sinful. Okay. Here's where we have to be so very careful. And here's where I think that we, even today, as Baptists, make this mistake is we forget about the sinful nature of those that we're dealing with, and we become offended or we go on the offensive when we should be loving them through Christ. I guess that's probably the best way I can say it. But we need to remember that people have a sinful nature. Okay.
I think I think one of the things that I discovered a while back, and God just it really put it on my heart to make sure that we understand this, is that our Great Commission says, first of all, that we are to go and make disciples of all nations. That's number one. And then number two, we're to baptize them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And then number three, we're to teach them to observe what he commands us. We get that out of order sometimes, where we as a church tend to try to impact our local community by saying you can't be, whether it's homosexual, or you can't be overeating, or you can't be whatever particular sin that we decide that we want to point out. We say that first, and then we say, oh, well, you need to be saved and all that. That's the wrong order, because the reality is that society doesn't recognize the same morality that we recognize based on God's law. And I think part of the problem that we have as a church is that we have that tendency to point out the sin, as you said, forget that they're sinners, but we also have to remember not only are they sinners just like we are, but we recognize our sin because we have a morality that is fixed and never changing, because we base that morality on the Bible. And a lot of people who are not Christians don't base their morality on the Bible, rather on societal norms, if you will. And that's I think it's what you pointed out. I think it's important that we recognize that they are sinful, and that sinfulness changes their perspective on the things that we call sinful.
It's true. That's true. Now, what I want to do is, when I read this article, I'm not going to go back and read it all, but in the spirit of Christ, Christians should oppose, and I gave this long list: racism, every form of greed, selfishness, and vice, all forms of sexual immorality. I listed all of these, like Butch was saying, these sins that we sometimes will point out the sin before we realize that they are a sinner. We do kind of have this backwards sometimes, but that's not saying that we shouldn't have a stance on this.
Absolutely.
Okay. For instance, let me just hit let me probably hit the hottest topic I can right away, and that being the one of racism. Okay. That is on every news broadcast right now. Everywhere you look, everyone is accusing everybody else of being a racist in some form or fashion. Uh, the point is this: racism violates the nature of God. Okay. God does not show partiality. He does not show partiality. Um, I like the way this one is worded. It said God does not receive face. That means God does not evaluate people based on externals. Okay, we are not judged by God on the color of our skin. Okay, it's the heart that matters here, and we as Christians should oppose racism. Okay, we go on. Some of the Old Testament prophets preached against certain sins. Amos preached against greed and selfishness. The Bible constantly tells us that we need to be looking for ways to minister to the orphaned and the poor and those that are out. These are all social items in our society that we cannot remove ourselves from. We have to be opposed to racism. We have to be involved in helping these type things. To go on, we're encouraged to oppose adultery, homosexuality, pornography, all of these type things, because is it because that we as a society think that they're a bad thing? It's because the standard is God's word, and we put our faith and trust in God's word. That's the standard. That's what we believe in. Okay. Now, I know as a society, they might embrace some of these things, but here's where we have to take a stance and say, no, I know what you're saying. I've heard your argument, but God's word says this, and this is the stance I have to take because this is the way I believe. My heart has been changed because of my relationship with Jesus Christ, and I now have the mind of Christ. I see these things like this, okay? We're supposed to defend the sanctity of human life. Um, this is a big deal right now. And I know some of my pastor friends, they take an active stance against organizations such as Planned Parenthood and all this kind of stuff. These are social issues that we have to take a stance in this sense against the taking of human lives. Um, I told Butch when I looked at this, I'm like, I'm not going to have fun talking about this one tonight, because the more I'm looking at what I want to say, I'm like, how do we cover this? I think what I'm going to say is this. I could keep giving these points here, but what I want to say is this: we cannot, as born again children of God, be two-faced on these things. What we say we believe and adhere to on Sunday needs to be the same thing we believe and speak about from Monday through Saturday. In other words, we would all agree, yes, we're opposed to racism, but you cannot go out the following week and advocate it in any way. We need to be sound doctrinally on this, and this is why I believe the Southern Baptists have written this article to define that this is the way that we believe in these areas. So I just feel like it's important that we make sure that we do this. Should we be opposed to those that snuff out the lives of people who are in need? Sure, we should be. Should we be upset at unjust judicial system? Sure, we should be. Should we stand against those who tell people that they're lost? I mean, not lost, but that they're helpless and hopeless and nothing can ever be done for them or with them, yes, we need to be against that. What I'm saying is these are stances that I believe we need to take in opposition, so to speak, to society. Now, Butch, I know you had a softer side here. I'm being the hard one. You
Well,
show the softer side here.
I think it's important for us to kind of understand that these issues are real, and they impact the lives of people, sometimes even within our church. And so I think we have to be very careful, not just in how we say this, but how we view what this means to us as a church. How do we as Christians have any real, active, and lasting impact on society? I think we make it a little harder than it has to be. If you go back to the Great Commission and the order that we are commanded to do things in, the very first thing that we are to do is to make disciples. That is, we are to teach people that there is a God, and that God does love them, and that he died for them, and that he died for their sins, and that he desires a relationship with them. And if we can share that message with enough people, those that we come into contact with, perhaps they will view our approach a little less as we are being judgmental towards them, and they will view it as as God commanded us. We are loving our enemies. We are loving them in the same way that God loves them. And as we spend time doing that, we will impact their life, and they will, and in that way, by addressing that most basic human need, that is the need to be in a relationship with God, because we're all made in his image, and we're all made in such a way that we seek after that relationship. And if we can just impact them in that way, we can share the gospel with them and do that so that they can then move forward in that relationship with God. We will have an impact on our society on a smaller scale, but it's a more lasting and permanent reality. And then after we have shared with them the gospel and they accept the gospel, we allow Christ to make changes in their heart. It's not our job to change people. It's our job to share the gospel. It is the job of Jesus and the Holy Spirit to bring about sanctification. Remember, that's another way that we talk about that. It's not our place to do that. But I do think that on a large scale, that we have to view some realities. There are, and I absolutely don't want this to come out sounding political, but we live in a society where politics matters, and I think. And I'm not telling you who to vote for or who not to vote for, but I do think that you should really seriously pray about who you are going to vote for, and whether or not that person is going to support or not support these values that we're talking about here tonight.
Yeah, I think Butch didn't use this verse, but I'm going to go ahead and use it right now, because the key to dealing with social issues as a Christian is to remember that we're supposed to be salt and light to the world. Right. Okay. And sometimes putting a little salt on an issue can cause some irritation, but it is for the purpose of bringing about good for this. Okay. Right. So I guess maybe that would probably be the best way to look at that. There are any number of social problems going on out there. We cannot, as Christians, I do not believe we can be pacifists in this. I do not think Christ is okay with us sticking our head in the sand and hunkering down until he comes back, which he is coming back. I do think that we do need to be, does that mean that everybody should run for office? If the Lord lays it on your heart, go for it. I'm not saying it's not. We need more Christian people in leadership so that these things we're talking about can take place. But at the same time, the biggest thing I think we need to remember is we cannot be judgmental, abusive, abrasive, and repel people from the gospel because of we take a stance on certain things. Okay. Should we take a stance? Sure. Should we know why we believe what we believe? Absolutely. Can we share Christ's love with people even in spite of that? Absolutely. But let's not run people away. Let's not run people off from Jesus because, you know, because we're abusive or abrasive with our words, dealing with something socially. It's all over the news right now. It's on every broadcast. I mean, I read a few of the big ones, but gracious, we could spend hours talking about this. But the point is for us not necessarily to list all the social injustices out there. The point is this: we need to remind the unrighteous. We need to remind those who are leading us or whatever, that the end of this world will come about when the King of Kings and Lord of Lords is sitting on the throne. They're not the ones permanently ruling. Jesus is coming back and will be coming back soon. Okay.
Amen.
So, that, like I said, I knew that was going to be a tough one. We talked earlier today how hard it was going to be to try to explain our stance on social injustice and stuff. But anyhow, I think it's just important that we remember to be salt and light. Okay, next week we're just going to go back to covering one topic. Reason being is because the following week when we finish up with family, that one is a huge one, and there's just no way we're going to be able to get everything into to one teaching next week. We barely made it this week, and these were two simple ones here. So we'll see you back next week as we continue our study of the Baptist Faith and Message. Thank you for joining us. Butch, be safe down there, and we will see you guys on Sunday. Have a good evening.
Thanks, guys, for watching.